Zak Bagans has made a career out of investigating the paranormal, having been involved with such shows as Ghost Adventures, Paranormal Challenge, Deadly Possessions, and Halloween Wars. He has used the success to fund his haunted museum in Las Vegas, which houses artifacts related to both the paranormal and the criminally insane. John Wayne Gacy was the notorious serial killer operating out of Chicago from the late 60s until the late 70s. He would lure victims into his home with the promise of illicit substances. He would then trick the young men into putting on a pair of handcuffs, claiming that he was going to demonstrate a magic trick. He would then force himself on them, torture them, and finally asphyxiate them before hiding their remains in his crawl space. In the 11 years that he operated, he was responsible for the deaths of over 33 people before he was arrested on December 21st, 1978, and sentenced to execution by lethal injection. Gacy had appeared for years to be the perfect family man, being an active member of his community, and in a detail that the media became obsessed with, volunteering as a clown who would perform at parades, fundraisers, and children's hospitals. This was unrelated to his crimes, but was such an odd detail that the press dubbed him the Killer Clown. This apparently served as the inspiration for Stephen King's It, and since then, clowns just haven't been able to catch a break. While awaiting his fate on death row, Gacy took up painting, creating self-portraits featuring himself dressed as Pogo the Clown. He is believed to have created over 2,000 paintings in prison before his death in 1994. After this, his attorney auctioned the paintings off, with several of them being purchased and burned in a bonfire attended by the families of the victims. Of course, this just made the paintings that remained more valuable and rare, and they have been known to show up in auctions where they are purchased for tens of thousands of dollars by people with questionable morals and taste. Speaking of which, Zak Bagans purchased a few of Gacy's paintings and put them on display in his museum in a display case dedicated to the memorabilia related to the Killer Clown. However, despite his best efforts, he was unable to purchase Gacy's brain to add it to the exhibit. Number 4. Peggy the Doll. A staple item in any museum focusing on ghosts and murder is a classic haunted doll. Robert the Doll is a classic, and the whole world has learned about Annabelle at this point. But Zak has a doll on display which he claims puts them all to shame, and her name is Peggy. Peggy's story begins in 2015 when a paranormal investigator named Jane Harris received a call from a distraught woman who claimed to have purchased a doll at a garage sale that was causing her to suffer from a mystery illness and vivid nightmares. The woman locked the doll in her shed until Harris agreed to take the doll away with her. A couple days later, she became sick and unable to get out of bed. She started hearing strange noises and hallucinated while the doll was in the house. Peggy was examined by psychics who claimed that she was possessed by the spirit of a woman born in 1946 who had died of a respiratory illness and attached herself to the doll. Harris uploaded a video of the doll online, and almost 100 viewers claimed to have become briefly ill after seeing the video. Zak soon purchased the doll, putting it on display in his museum, where guests are asked to sign a waiver before seeing it, absolving him from any liability should the guests experience horrible paranormal activity due to exposure to Peggy. Number 3. The Manson Blood Painting. Charles Manson was the infamous cult leader who formed a group of mostly young women, teaching them that they were the reincarnations of the original Christians and that he was Jesus Christ. Manson began using his followers for extortion, taking a music teacher who they believed had inherited a large fortune hostage in his home and demanding that he join the cult and turn over the money. The man maintained that they were mistaken, and Manson attacked him with a sword before having one of his followers finish the job. In the cult's most famous incident, Manson sent 4 family members to the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate with instructions for them to end the lives of Tate and the 4 guests who were staying with her. The next night, these family members were joined by 3 others and brought by Manson to the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, where they broke in and tied up the 2 residents at Manson's instructions. He then ordered them to dispatch the victims and left. Although it hasn't been conclusively proven, the Manson family are believed to be responsible for at least 15 other deaths, with Manson himself claiming at one point that he was responsible for 35 total deaths. Manson was apprehended and remained in prison until his death in 2017. Even while in custody, he maintained a dedicated group of admirers, and after his death, his ashes were scattered at his funeral, and an admiring artist gathered some of them up. The artist then used their own blood in order to paint a picture of the cult leader, using Manson's real ashes to fill in the eyes on the portrait. Zak Bagans purchased the painting and put it on display at his museum. When asked how he was sure that the ashes were authentic, he responded, "My people were there at the funeral, and my people saw what went down." Because of course they were. Number 2. The Devil's Rocking Chair. In 1981, a young boy in Brookfield, Connecticut named David Glatzel began having vivid night terrors. As time went on, these nightmares began infiltrating his everyday life, with him seeing haunting figures such as an old man with a white beard and a man with big black eyes and animalistic features and jagged teeth who would sit in an old rocking chair and watch the boy. He then began engaging in bizarre behavior like kicking, biting, seizures, and marks of strangulation appearing on him out of nowhere. His family reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they concluded that David was possessed by a demon. Priests performed 3 exorcisms on David, which supposedly caused him to levitate. In the chaos, the boyfriend of Debbie, David's older sister, Arnie Johnson, confronted the demon and told it to leave the child alone and to take him instead. David made a full recovery, but the demon decided to take Arnie up on his offer. A few months later, Arnie stabbed his landlord to death, and upon apprehension claimed that the devil made him do it. His trial marked the first time in history that someone entered a plea of not guilty for reasons of demonic possession, although this plea was rejected. This story was loosely adapted into the 3rd Conjuring film, which follows Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case. Lorraine Warren also claimed to have seen beasts sitting in the rocking chair, and not long after her death, Zak purchased the chair and put it on display. He released footage of the chair moving by itself and claims that the first night it was on display, guests began having vivid visions and passing out in front of the chair, and causing 5 of his tour guides to burst into tears. Bagan had to close the exhibit for a while, but the chair is back on display for guests to be terrified by. Number 1. Ed Gein's Cauldron. Ed Gein was a serial in Plainsfield, Wisconsin, living on the family property he had inherited until his crimes were discovered, the details of which captivated America due to their cruelty, violence, and disgustingness. Gein grew up with a brother, a frequently drunk father, and an overbearing religious fanatic of a mother. She was cruel and puritanical, constantly going on about the dangers of sin, carnal desire, and mocking and shaming her children, who rarely left the home for anything other than school. The family lived together until Ed's father died when Ed was 34. 4 years later, while burning brush with Ed, his brother Henry got caught in a blaze and died, leaving Ed alone with his mother. He took care of his mother, never dating or going out with friends, in order to appease her until she passed away, driving Ed off the deep end. People in Plainfield started going missing, with suspicion eventually leading the police to Gein's home. They discovered a variety of horrible sights, like a skin lampshade, skull soup bowls, and various masks and items of clothing that Gein had constructed from his victims, as well as bodies that he had stolen from the local cemetery. A couple months later, Gein's property was sold at auction, where a woman purchased an old cauldron, thinking that it would make a good planter for her flowers. Years later, the woman's granddaughter was talking with one of Gein's old neighbors who had been assisting the police with cleanup on the farm. He immediately recognized the cauldron as being the one he had seen years before, covered in dried blood and next to a vat of entrails. Ed Gein was of course the inspiration for classic horror movie characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, but his real-life cauldron was put up for sale in an Ed Gein auction in 2015, where it was purchased by Zak Bagans, who put it on display at his museum.
Coming in at number 5, we have Dr. Jack Kevorkian Death Van, also known as the Deathmobile. Dr. Jack Kevorkian's van was a place many people spent their last moments alive. The 1968 Volkswagen van was where Dr. Kevorkian carried out as many as 130 assisted suicides in the 90s, and has become a piece of history. However, at the time, the pathologist was met with controversy and public criticism for his taboo work on physician-assisted suicide with terminally ill patients. He spent 8 years in prison for second-degree murder because of this, but is often viewed as a pioneer in the medical field and as an activist. His impact was so great that HBO released a drama called You Don't Know Jack, in which Al Pacino won an Emmy and a Golden Globe for his portrayal of the controversial controversial doctor. Over the year, the death van has seen many different owners. Zak purchased this van for $32,500 from American Jewelry and Loan. When the Detroit pawn shop first bought the vehicle, it was actually featured on an episode of a TV show. Apparently, Long Island medium Teresa Caputo also passed by the van in their warehouse and said she felt something there. Visitors of Zak's Haunted Museum can peek inside the Dr. Jack Kevorkian's death van and see the exact spot where many people died. Coming in at number 4, we have Ed Gein's cauldron. This is certainly one of the more gruesome relics on display at Zak Bagans Haunted Museum, and it's believed to have belonged to the butcher of Plainfield, Ed Gein. He's known for not only committing 2 murders, but mutilating corpses and fashioning items from human skin. Some of this morbid creation include masks made from real human faces, a human skin lampshade, and a female skin suit. Although his kill count doesn't technically classify him as a serial killer, he still served as inspiration for several fictional serial killers like Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. This cauldron is said to have been a place for Ed Gein to boil body parts in, but its authenticity is largely unknown. It was auctioned off in 2015 by a man named Dan McIntyre. He claimed to have inherited it from his grandmother, who bought it in 1958 at Gein's estate sale following his arrest. That's bleak as The highest bidder was Zak, purchasing the little pot for $2,800. At the time, Dan said he was happy to be rid of it, as it was the source of strange phenomena. I mean, I wouldn't want that in my home. Now, Ed Gein's cauldron calls Zak's Haunted Museum home, where it is said to radiate negative energy. Coming in at number 3, we have the Demon House Staircase. The original staircase from the Gary Demon House is said to be so haunted that construction crews walked off the job and refused to come back after its installation. Set back in a dimly lit corner, the wooden staircase rests on a layer of dirt extracted from the location famous for demonic activity. The Demon House was located in Gary, Indiana, and was unfortunately home to the Ammons family. It was said to be a portal to hell, and the demons seemed to emanate from beneath the stairs, the same stairs displayed at Zak's museum. There were reports of demonic possessions, a child levitating, and many other disturbing events. The family's matriarch, LaToya Ammons, had to undergo multiple exorcisms as a result. It was so bad that even the local police department and social services were convinced of its purported hauntedness. There are things in this world that we will never fully understand, like why Zak decided to buy the home plagued by demonic entities. He did shoot his documentary Demon House there, where he investigated the haunting. It must have left an impact on him because the house has since been demolished and the stairs continue to haunt Zak's museum. Coming in at number 2, we have the Devil's Rocking Chair. This sinister chair is linked to a very famous investigation done by Ed and Lorraine Warren, and its story serves as the plot for The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. Zak actually purchased this chair for $67,000 just hours before the death of Lorraine Warren. Ooh, creepy. The Devil's Rocking Chair was the site of the infamous exorcism of David Glatzel, who was allegedly possessed by a demon. The 11-year-old at the time was being tormented by a man-like demon who resembled a beast with sharp, jagged teeth, horns, and hoofs. As the haunting progressed, the chair was said to be under the demon's power, and David would often see the beast sitting in it. Ed and Lorraine performed numerous exorcisms on David in that very chair. The final exorcism was a success, and the demon was expelled from David right into his sister's boyfriend, who killed his landlord shortly after. He pled not guilty due to demonic possession, a first in American history, citing that the devil made me do it. It didn't work, by the way. In 2019, the Devil's Rocking Chair's exhibit actually had to be shut down because it was doing its job a little too well. 6 different people shared the same disturbing experience with the chair. They all had bouts of uncontrollable crying, and one even collapsed above it. The museum having adverse effects on visitors isn't anything new, with ambulances having to be called in the past, but this was the first time in the museum's history that an exhibit had to be shut down. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Dybbuk Box. In the number 1 spot is known as the most haunted object in the world, the notorious Dybbuk Box. According to Jewish mythology, a Dybbuk is a malevolent spirit that's said to haunt and possess the living, and the Dybbuk Box is home to the evil entity. This wine cabinet is so haunted that it actually served as inspiration for the horror film The Possession. The Dybbuk Box first became a sensation when it was listed on eBay, along with an extensive ghost story attached to it. After some owner hopping, it came into Zak's possession. Shortly after the Dybbuk Box arrived in the museum, holes allegedly began to appear around the haunted cabinet. A downtown Las Vegas marketing executive also apparently witnessed a black-cloaked apparition pass through the exhibit's door while doing a private tour with Zak. This haunted relic is no joke. Even Post Malone was apparently cursed by the Dybbuk when he visited the museum with Zak himself. After touching Zak's shoulder, who was resting his hand on the box, Post Malone had a streak of terrible luck. In less than a month, his private jet was forced to make an emergency landing when 2 tires blew flew out. His house was broken into by armed robbers, and then he got into a car crash. In at 5, Ed Gein's cauldron. For those who don't know, Ed Gein became infamous in Plainfield, Wisconsin after he was found to have exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned trophies out of the skins. His crimes were truly repugnant, and thankfully he was remanded to a psychiatric institution before dying at the age of 77. Now, very creepily displayed at Zak Bagans Museum is Ed Gein's cauldron, which was initially used by his family to render hog fat on their farm, but later had a far more sinister job at the hands of Gein. When found, the cauldron was covered in dried blood and guts, so it doesn't take much to figure out what he had been using it for. After its discovery, people reported dark energy around the cauldron, even stating that they experienced mysterious illnesses and disruption of nearby electronics. People who have encountered the cauldron have described a feeling of unease, dizziness, and even anxiety. Would you dare gaze upon it? In at 4, John Morrell's preserved thumb. Now this one's a doozy. Originally housed at a Tennessee museum, this mummified thumb belonged to John Morrell, a horse thief and bandit who would frequently dress up as a minister while giving fake sermons. And while giving fake sermons, his band of outlaws would steal horses from locals within town. He was once even written about by author Mark Twain in his book Life on the Mississippi. John died from tuberculosis on an unknown date, and his body was mummified and put on display, parts even being sent to different places around the country. Now what's so spooky about the thumb then? Well, supposedly it possessed the power to cause illness and distress in those that see it, confirming that a little piece of John still resides in the thumb, hell-bent on inflicting pain and torture on those that come across it. In at 3, Dybbuk box. For those of you who don't know, the Dybbuk box gained infamy in 2004 after an article was published in the Los Angeles Times, and from there it went on to spawn the horror movie The Possession. It is thought to be a spirit of a person who, instead of drifting over into the next life, stayed put and has the power to enter the bodies of living people. It is known as one of the world's most haunted items, and Zak paid tens of thousands of dollars in order to display it in his horror museum. Now the Dybbuk box will not be opened. Zak even stated that he was too terrified to do that. However, if you're over 18 and sign a waiver, you may just be given the opportunity. Godspeed. In at 2, Charles Manson's ashes. Now this one is just downright creepy. Even Zak Bagans himself thinks so, and that man is not easily creeped out. Firstly, take a look at this. Yep, it's a painting of the notorious cult leader Charles Manson, famous for forming the Manson family and responsible for a series of 9 grisly murders between July and August of 1969. He was later arrested in 1971 and died in prison at the age of 83 in 2017. Now, this painting is no ordinary painting because of course, Zak Bagans has no time for some non-possessed fancy art. This painting is in fact made up of Manson's own ashes, specifically in the eyes of the painting, which somehow makes this even more creepier. It was painted by Ryan Almighty, an artist who is famous for using human blood and human remains to create his artwork. You can find this piece displayed alongside Manson's false teeth, his own personal art he created in prison, and even his TV. Now some people have questioned the legitimacy of the painting, but Bagans has been quoted in saying, "I know exactly who was there, who got some of the ashes, the various people who grabbed the ashes to throw them in the air. I have all the footage. I'm really strict about how I display things, and I know they are all legitimate. This is legitimate." Well, there we have it, folks. And lastly, and at number 1, Peggy the Doll. Zak Bagans Haunted Museum is now the proud owner of Peggy the Doll, a doll that is apparently so sinister just looking at it will cause pain, suffering, and even heart attacks. Katrin Reddick believes that just looking at an image of the doll causes her to suffer from severe heart trauma. Spooky. Peggy was transported to the museum with a bag over her head, and a warning had to be displayed before any camera looked upon it. That's how dangerous and out of control she supposedly is. On one particular occasion, Zak asked for the help of a psychic to perform a seance, in hopes of making contact with the demonic spirit residing within Peggy. Of course, the seance rumbled nothing but fear in all that witnessed it, but sadly no demon made itself known.